everyone. You have found another episode of Austin Tech Connect. This is the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Austin Technology Council, you should be. We're a 33-year-old organization that has been here all along through the growth of Austin. And our role is to kind of be that thread that connects the generations of people in Austin. Those who've been here 30, 40 years, those who've been here 10 or 15 years, and the newcomers. And a thread that runs through all the verticals of tech. You know, back in the 80s, we were a semiconductor town. In the 90s, we were a software town. But now we have all of those plus fintech, medtech, robotics, space tech, deep tech, energy tech. The list keeps going. Austin has grown into a really amazing tech center and innovation hub. However, we need to work to make sure we're keeping it all connected. And that's what we do here at this podcast, Austin Tech Connect, because we try to introduce you to interesting people who are doing great things right here in Central Texas. And today we are joined by Sean Voigt. Hey, Sean, welcome to the show.
Hey, Tom. Great to be here. Awesome to be connecting with another builder in Austin's energy innovation community.
Well, for those of you who don't know Sean, he is the founder and CEO of Energy Innovation Hub Texas. We're going to learn a lot more about that later as we go. But he has been for his life working in climate and clean energy. He has done that in engineering. He's done it in management consulting, as an investor on the science side, and he is on a mission to make Austin, Texas, a global leader in energy transition. He also leads up and runs the local chapter of Stanford Angels and Entrepreneurs, who monthly meet over on the east side and drink some cocktails. And that's where I got to meet Sean the first time. And I'm really impressed with what he's been doing and the group that he brings together. And I said, Sean, you got to be on the podcast. So I'm glad you're here.
Thanks so much. I'm really looking forward to sharing more about what we're doing and being a part of this community.
So, Sean, let's go in the Wayback Machine a little bit. Let's go back. How did you get started? Like, you went to Stanford. That's a really good start to be a tech entrepreneur. But what led you to Stanford and what did you do after that?
Yeah, so I'm originally from South Africa. If you hear the lost vestiges of an accent,
I was going to say I picked up a little bit of an accent and I wasn't able to place it.
My family immigrated from South Africa to the States when I was about 13. I went to high school in Iowa and, somehow got into Stanford. And so in 2001, I'm 17 years old. I'm walking around this incredible country club of a campus, the world of opportunities just opening up around me. And, it hit me very viscerally that, I come from a country where you have massive economic disparity. I mean, if you've ever been to South Africa, you see it every single day, the shanty towns, the inequality, there's so many lives that don't have opportunities. And it struck me very, very viscerally that, I'd won this sort of like lottery and was, in this environment at Stanford with so much opportunity and just a unique experience that like the vast majority of the human population doesn't have. And that, I think, created a strong sense of how do I honor that and how do I use those opportunities meaningfully. And as I was kind of like struggling with that question my freshman year, I ended up taking a freshman seminar with a very famous scientist at Stanford that really opened up my eyes to climate change, food and energy systems, and also the role of technology in making food and energy systems more sustainable in a globe with a growing human population and consumption. And as a result of that, I was like, I think I really keyed in early on the role of technology in making human existence more sustainable on this planet. I decided to study chemical engineering and biology. The idea was I was going to become this, gnarly scientist and be working on the next levels of technology that were going to save humanity. I basically lived in the library and in various research labs for the next 4 years. Got into super top tier PhD programs. And really only sort of as I was graduating did I realize number one, I actually don't really enjoy being in a lab. It's not a great fit with my personality. And number two, technology by itself doesn't achieve scale and impact. You have to have the economics and the financials in there to make technology scalable in a way that's self-sustaining. And that, I think that those two realizations really sort of charted me on a totally different course that's now, spanned the rest of my career. I I ended up going and doing a master's at Columbia in New York to sort of transition, but moved into my very first like full-time role after, as in basically not being a student. I was, this is like sort of 2005, 2006 timeframe. Was at a renewable energy startup in New York called Primafuel. So I was like in the front trenches for green tech 1.0, as some of us will recall it. From there, I joined McKinsey as an analyst. This is 2010. Really was on the ground floor of building out the McKinsey sustainability practice, which is work that took me across the globe. Ended up leading all the way through to doing economic development work in low carbon economic development. I'm talking like, sleeping in shacks in upriver in Borneo and rainforests to being in Papua New Guinea and Ethiopia and so on. So, I think that period of my 20s was okay, like the technology underlying food and energy systems, starting to get exposed to the business and the economics around scaling technologies, all the way through to really sort of some of the deeper policy and social side of this tech. By 2012, I was kind of ready to come back to the States. I'd gotten into Harvard Business School, came back to Boston for that, and really started, I think, and that sort of spurred more of the interest around like what's the actual sort of like finance, capital deployment around this kind of stuff. So did various things in venture capital and a little bit of like private equity and advisory. I was at business school. I was working with Coastal Ventures and Black Coral Capital, and this is still broadly across impact. To kind of fast forward, after doing a tour of duty back at McKinsey, I started a search fund in 2018, 2019. So really sort of like micro private equity, looking to go acquire a business a lot in these sort of themes of grid transition, decarbonization. Going back and looking at my PPM, my private placement memorandum, I think I really called all of those trends. That ended up leading into me taking over basically the founder role at an agricultural biotech company called Red Leaf Biologics. So for a couple of years, I was living in Lexington, Kentucky, really putting in, I think, a really strong performance as a founder, building a company, a very, very technical and complicated company, from really sort of 3 folks in a lab to fully sort of scaling operations from field to manufacturing to market, and everything that I think a founder needs to sort of prove out in that phase. And so I think like really, depending on how you look at it, right, you could kind of say, wow, what a kind of a random walk of a career, or you could say, this has been really always guided by like a true north around energy impact, sort of that intersection of technology, markets, and finance in order to make sort of our planet hopefully a little bit more sustainable. I got back to Austin almost 2.5 years ago after leaving for that for that company, and then that really sort of spurred what I'm working on now, which is Energy Innovation Hub, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a lot more detail.
No, I mean, I like to hear people's sort of origin stories, and yours is actually, it's both eclectic, and yet there is definitely a linear piece that led you to where you are today. But the juxtaposition from last week's interview, the podcast that will have aired 1 week before this one, the entrepreneur, the young guy who is starting a company, also looking at saving the planet, didn't go to college, worked as a mechanic at Boeing, ended up managing restaurants, and then just started researching, because he was passionate about the planet, where was there a hole? And so it's interesting because here's this guy who had no science degree, now trying to put together a team to do this. And then you have you, who has a pretty impressive resume when you look at that, both in the things that you've done and the schools you went to. I mean, it's no slouch to go to Stanford, get a master's at Columbia, and then get an MBA at Harvard. So that, it is interesting to 2 weeks in a row talk to 2 different entrepreneurs doing very, very different things.
I will say the hardest thing I've ever done, and the thing will always be my proudest accomplishment, will be like that startup though. But no, yeah, I think, and as we'll get into in a second here, right? The complexity of what I'm trying to do next really does actually require having gone through that journey. I mean, it's the technical background, the sort of the strategic and problem solving you get from management consulting, the familiarity with startup, but also being able to take that investor perspective. And I'm really excited to bring that all together in what I do next.
Well, and the reason I bring up sort of that resume / pedigree of stuff isn't, to brag on you. It really is. I bring it up sort of the fact that you lived on the East Coast, you live on the West Coast. You could go anywhere to do this, right? You've lived internationally. Why Austin when you say, I'm going to come and build this energy innovation hub in Texas? There's been a lot of mud thrown at Austin lately saying, well, there's no innovation in Austin and there's no future in Austin. And yet every day I talk to people like you who have planted their flag and say, Austin is where I'm building something. Why Austin for energy and what you're working on?
Well, first of all, I love Austin. On a personal level, I will just say, as someone that immigrated from South Africa, lived all over the world, lived all over the States, this is the first place that I've really felt like actually is home and where I want to put down roots. So I will say that for anyone who's listening from outside of Austin, you need to get here. This place is really magic. That is actually not why Austin. And I think if I can sort of give the broader answer your question, giving the broader thesis behind Energy Innovation Hub Texas, I think the first thing that folks need to understand is that the energy transition and what's happening in energy right now is the biggest opportunity of this generation. It's the defining trend of this century. This is quite literally the order of magnitude of the internet in the 90s. I feel very, very comfortable defending the perspective that this is way bigger than AI, and I can definitely sort of explain why that is. So the energy transition is literally hundreds of trillions of dollars of value in the next 25 years, all transitioning into this space, and so many incredibly powerful exponential up on adoption, exponential down on cost, digital, decentralized. I mean, we're going to have hundreds, thousands of unicorns being built in this space in the next 10 years. And that's inevitable. We're not going to probably go into the nuances of the thesis, but I can just for now, just take me at face value on that.
Well, you used the term energy transition.
Yeah.
And I don't know that was a term I was familiar with. And before we started recording, you used it a couple times. Can you sort of give a little definition around, because you said, hey, this is the defining trend of the century and it's the opportunity of a generation. The energy transition. Can you tell us a little bit exactly what that is about?
Yeah, sure. I guess it means a couple different things to different people. If I was going to maybe try to put it into 3 bullet points, it's decarbonization, decentralization, digitization. So, on decarbonization, clean energy has become the utterly dominant form of producing electrons. Wind, solar, and battery now account for more than 90% of every new piece of generation capacity getting built around the world. They have been for some time. They're going to account for 95% of everything new that's being built going forward. That's just based on pure economics. I think the U.S. reached over 50% clean energy generation just last year. The bare minimum the sort of just the purely sort of economic scenario is $60 trillion going into this over the next 25 years. That's just, again, based on pure economics. If we see more sort of global action on climate change, that number goes to 120 trillion. So I guess the first thing I'd say is decarbonization technologies have become the utterly dominant form of generation capacity, really not open to debate. You also have, I guess, when I talk about decentralization, we're seeing a fundamental, really as profound as the internet restructuring in the way that the grid is structured. For 120 years, we had this old model of you had these big centralized thermal generation plants, coal plants, nuclear, whatever. You would create these electrons all the way over there. You would push them down transmission wires into distribution wires, and then that energy would just be sort of consumed by these points of end load. Now, that's fundamentally changing with everything electrifying, from EVs to heat pumps to, I mean, even sort of like you can even think about elements of your connected home, where now we're seeing at the grid edge this dynamic interplay between what some folks would call distributed energy resources. The most intuitive of those for many folks are probably like a rooftop solar panel behind, like a Tesla pack, a behind the meter battery. But really, it's everything, right? It's your home thermostat, it's your water heater, it's certainly your EV. And so we're now seeing that we have this bidirectional flow at the grid edge, and that is opening up insanely exciting and interesting business models. For instance, like things like virtual power plants, where, to give probably the simplest and most intuitive example, right, you have thousands of electric vehicles in a certain region, which can then be coordinated to shift when energy is consumed, when energy is pushed back into the grid. And I can tell you that this is a fundamental paradigm shift in the way that like energy is happening. Again, I'm not talking about, in the future. I'm saying this is happening literally right now. And then the third piece around digitization is that these are like these solutions are like they're just inherently designed in a way or compatible with digital infrastructure. Energy produces way more data than like base social media combined, right? Like a single like oil well just produces like more data than like Facebook in a day. Now, and sorry, why was I saying that? And I think we are now seeing the confluence of these different sectors. Like mobility is no longer separate from energy, right? Like electric vehicles and charging infrastructure now converge mobility and the grid. The role of finance and insurance is becoming incredibly closely tied to these themes. I mean, the role of data analytics, AI, and machine learning, and sorry, I should also add like built environment. Again, sort of your home, your thermostat, your heat pump. Like these things are all now becoming connected into this interconnected, highly data dependent grid. And so the energy transition is really sort of this. I mean, it truly is the transition of energy in every single sector into these trends driven by exponential adoption of renewables, exponential cost declines in these technologies, and all these other factors. And I mean, we're talking. I'm literally not exaggerating, and it's not even sort of like hypothesis. Like this is like guaranteed, inevitable, hundreds of trillions of dollars in the next couple decades going into this. So that's the energy transition, and so going back to the Energy Innovation Hub thesis, like. This is the generational opportunity. Again, this is bigger than AI. AI is ultimately subservient to all these trends. This is the equivalent of the internet in the 90s, and so that's point number one.
So well, I want to jump in right there because obviously with what's going on with AI and quantum computing and some other things, for them to actually reach their potential, we're going to need more energy than we've ever produced, because the numbers show that if we don't produce more energy, we're not going to be able to sustain what's going on with all of this other breakthrough technology. So one thing that someone told me recently is, and you probably are better aware of this than I am, is that we're going to see breakthroughs in the next 10 years in how we create energy that the average person hasn't even thought of. I mean, most of us think, you've got coal, you've got gas, you've got solar, you've got nuclear, et cetera. They're going to find, my friend who was telling me this was very confident that there's going to be discoveries that will make us go, whoa, when it comes to energy.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I would also like my thesis is actually really that like the opportunity, like the really massive opportunity requires basically no novel innovation, in particular novel innovation on generation. I'm talking about like, I mean, I think I'm very, very pro-nuclear. I haven't heard anyone say that like we're going to have any nuclear online within 10 years. I'm very, very pro-geothermal, maybe a little bit faster. But, the bottom line is like when solar and wind are literally zero marginal cost technology. It costs them nothing to produce the next electron. And when you have battery technologies that literally follow Moore's law and have gone down 10x in their cost in the last 10 years and are still going down, like, I'm massively oversimplifying here, but, you know, filling up a battery, like when battery is the lowest cost option for storage, and you fill it up with cheaper, and you just fill it up with free electrons that are zero carbon, like that is the. I mean, if you sort of go with like the equivalent of the Bitcoin maximalist story, right? Like that's going to be that's going to be the solution. And I think, you know, nuclear nuclear and geothermal will for sure play an important role in the mix. Not before 2030 and probably not before 2035, but certainly going beyond that, because there are some nuances to the way that the grid operates. Actually, not so much in that we need baseload or that we even need dispatchable, but actually more around something called inertia. So I think those will play a role. But really, sort of the thesis in clean energy that I'm like very, very strongly trying to evangelize here to investors and to founders and to folks is, this is not about coming up with some complicated new carbon capture technology or new generation technology or something that requires crazy applied science and engineering. We are now in this golden era where you just take technologies off the shelf that are already cheaper, faster, better use case. They have mature supply chains, and you can either build purely sort of digital infrastructure, data analytics, software type of solutions, or you can combine that those fundamentally advantaged off-the-shelf mature technologies with a digital interface, and really you just focus on the business model innovation, the financial model innovation, sort of digital interface, and often a combination of those things. And again, when you're in an industry where adoption is just exponentially up in every direction and costs everything down, you can just do that. Just come up with focus on those types of innovations that I'm talking about. And that's why I say, it's going to be thousands of unicorns in the space in the next in the years to come.
So let's talk about the Energy Innovation Hub Texas. What is it, and how will it help the advancement of what you're talking about?
Well, I didn't quite finish the thesis. I'll kind of hit the other 2 points because it feeds into this. So the other thing is that, so why Texas, why Austin? Well, Texas is energy, right? I think no one's going to debate that Texas is obviously sort of like the epicenter for energy in the conventional sense. But I think a lot of folks don't realize that Texas is also the leader when it comes to these types of energy transition, right? So Texas, we're the largest energy market in the U.S. We're 2.5 times bigger than the next market. We're basically going to double in the next 5 years. We have an overwhelming concentration of players in the energy space. I think we have 22 out of the 25 Fortune 100 energy companies. We've got the overwhelming concentration of renewable developers, equipment manufacturers, battery players, right? The entire energy supply chain is here. All of the expertise, capital, like that's here that's here in Texas. And we also have a market structure for the grid here, ERCOT. I'm sure most folks have heard it, which is like fundamentally free market oriented, and again, like renewables just win in the free market. Like we're past the inflection point. So even just to sort of like underline that, right? Texas is like, we dominate California when it comes to renewables. We're number one in wind. We're number one in solar. We're great there in battery, right? Like we have got unique renewables resources. But then why Austin specifically? And I often get this question, well, aren't they doing stuff in Houston? And if you sort of go back to this thesis that I'm espousing around where clean energy is going, it's, Austin is really the only place that is really at this confluence of tech and energy, right? And this is, I think that there's many different dimensions to this, right? But if you think about, for instance, like the data set, the intersection of energy and compute and the data center boom, right? Like this is, hyperscalers are becoming obviously sort of the largest drivers of one of the largest drivers of load growth, but they're also some of the most important innovators when it comes to energy and the way that data gets used in the space. if you think about, again, going to like the role of data, the digital interface around connecting these distributed devices, right? This is like the next version of energy isn't like wildcatter in a hard hat, work doing engineering, or I think some of maybe those more sort of like physical engineering types of innovations. Like it's the intersection of the developer and the computer science engineer with these types of energy assets, and you really can't imagine, and that has to be Austin, right? Like Amazon and AWS is like one example of of the next energy major. I don't see Amazon opening up its next energy innovation hub in Houston. They have to be in Texas, and if they have to be in Texas, they're obviously going to be in Austin. So Austin really has that intersection of like the energy players and the energy ecosystem, plus that tech and innovation scene that defines the space. So that's that. Do you want me to kind of go into like what we're actually the model and the space of what we're doing?
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about the Energy Innovation Hub Texas, because I think that not a lot of people know about it yet, and I think that that's an important part of our future here in Austin is remembering that we are also energy tech.
Yeah, and we should be quite literally the global leader of the space, right? To me, it makes absolutely no. Given everything I just talked about, right, it makes zero sense that San Francisco is getting 5 times more funding in energy venture than Texas, right? Like if you look at, and I'll come back to your question because I know I'm kind of right, but if you look at where European energy companies are starting their American beachhead, it's Texas. If you look at where U.S. startups and companies need to go into the market, it's Texas, right? Like even if you're getting funded out of Silicon Valley, like if you're an energy tech company, you damn well better be having a footprint in Texas, right? And so I think we are missing this opportunity to step into our rightful role to be the global leader of the energy transition. And I firmly believe that Austin is the rightful owner of that. So, when I got back to Austin a little over 2 years ago after building that company in Kentucky, I was struck by a couple of things. One is obviously sort of Texas's potential, but then also I think the massive gap between where Austin should be and what's actually going on. And without sort of going through the whole history, I think there really are sort of 3 things that drive that disconnect between potential versus reality right now. One is access to early stage capital. I'll go through each of these. The second is the access to market, and in particular sort of like key corporates, industry players, strategics. And then 3 is like broader connectivity across the ecosystem. So just to kind of go through those, raising early stage capital sucks regardless of what industry you're in, right? But it is, I think, definitionally harder in climate and clean energy. And I've experienced this both as a founder raising early stage capital in this space, and I've also seen it working with various angel investors and angel collectives. And the reason is quite simple, right? Like when you're going out to friends and family and to angel investors and to folks that are going to be writing that $25K or that $50K check, average investor of that profile can very easily understand an enterprise SaaS company or a CPG company or maybe a few other things, right? But like if you're looking at a climate and an energy company, like you're really going to struggle to understand what that company is doing unless you are very, very deep in the space already. Like the policy and the regulatory complexity, even around sort of things about how you operate in the electrical grid here, is that's disqualifyingly complex if you're not already in this space. There's often a techno and economic level of diligence, and even just sometimes just sort of a market understanding space where I was just seeing over and over again, angel investors sending me decks asking for my opinion on stuff, and just they're just not equipped to be able to understand these opportunities, and so it's as a result of that, it's just very, very hard to get access to that early stage check as a climate and energy founder. So one thing I'll get to is like how we solve that gap. The second, I think, an equally difficult challenge around climate and energy as a founder is the commercial the commercial and go-to-market. And what I mean by that is your ability, you're as a climate and energy founder, and I truly can't think of an exception to this rule. Like your go-to-market and your scaling is always going to pass through some kind of large industrial player. That might be a big utility. It might be an independent power producer. It might be an equipment manufacturer. It could be a EV player. But regardless, and that may be a strategic customer. They may be a channel partner. They may be a key supplier. But these large industry incumbents are always going to be gatekeepers and kingmakers in your scale up trajectory. The problem is that these same players are also risk averse. They're notoriously slow moving, and they're very inaccessible, particularly to first time founders. So we have this issue where you might be a founder trying to build something. You may have a great idea, but first of all, you actually don't necessarily know if you're solving the right problem, because it's very difficult for you to get meaningful, actual, that classic market feedback and iteration loop is super slow and inefficient. And you might actually spend the first 12 to 18 months of your startup trying to gain traction. When you finally get there, realize you've been building the wrong thing, or it's only 50% right. And obviously, sort of when you combine that with the capital and the funding challenge, you can see why so many folks sort of like don't even make it out of the gate. And then the third piece is connectivity across the ecosystem. You know, when I got back to Austin and I was trying to like basically map out who was here and who was doing what, I would frequently hear, "Oh yeah, well I work in the energy space and I do this and that." But you know, the only time I really see other folks that are doing similar stuff in Austin is when I go out to a conference in DC. And because climate and clean energy is so multidisciplinary and and is really this intersection of so many different roles and types of industries, right? Like it's really important that like you actually have a forum for the industry player and the investor and the founder and the government and policy folks to actually be engaging, and I think also start to share common vision for what's possible. So those are the three things that I set out to address when I started out with this. Initially, this started as a nights and weekends project. I started just putting together panels, events, various sort of ways to convene the ecosystem and just, I think, start to like try to advocate for this vision, both for where clean energy is going, but also for the role that Austin can play, and to get everyone connected. By the way, we're over 700 energy professionals in Austin now, probably growing by 50 to 100 a month. Great mix of industry players, investors, founders, government policy officials. And you know, as I started doing that in 2023, I realized that I was getting so much traction and enthusiasm and so much desire from different players to collaborate to make this happen, that like this kind of, at the time, crazy idea that I had for really establishing a center for energy innovation in Austin was actually going to be doable. And so the first iteration and what we're launching now is a multimodal approach to addressing those core issues that I talked about. So right now what we're launching is we are very, very hands-on. We take a very, very hands-on investor operator role with founders. So we are writing those pre-seed and those seed checks, but critically we're doing this really sort of hand in glove with the founder. We are bringing in the industry players that are those key go-to-market players, right? So so there's founder A they've got this great innovation. I already know that I have this relationship with this industry player, this manufacturer. I know that these things are a fit. So as we're kind of going through mapping out the business plan and mapping out the investment in this company, we're bringing in that industry player. Say, what is it going to look like over the next 3 months, 12 months to share this data, to qualify for this pilot, right? Right? Similarly, bringing in the visibility across the capital stack. So while we're the ones writing this pre-seed and the seed check, which is really where the gap is, You also want to make sure that you've got your next set of investors that are picking up the rest of that trajectory. So bringing in the Series A investors to understand, okay, like what are the milestones that they want to see from this company in order for them to write that next check, right? And then how are we working backwards from that to make sure that we've got a business plan, a plan, sort of a trajectory for our cash flows, sort of appropriate resourcing and hiring, such that like when we're writing this check right now, we know that we have line of sight through to the commercialization of these key strategics. We've got line of sight to the milestones needed to get to the next funding round. We know that the current valuation and the future valuation that those things triangulate. And really ultimately, what you want, the mission here is that, when you're writing this check, again, as an investor operator that's working very, very closely with these founders, who most of the time are first-time founders, right? And don't necessarily have this sort of framework. When you're writing that check, you're basically now only underwriting execution risk because you've really sort of mapped out those things. So that's I think that's sort of the simplistic explanation of the model.
Nice. Well, as you're putting on events and as you're doing things, please keep in mind that if the Austin Technology Council can help you promote an event, we always our calendar is open to all other groups that are promoting tech here in Austin, so we can put it on our calendar. And if there's an event where we could partner with you, we try to collaborate as much as we can, because what's good for any sector of tech is good for all sectors of tech. Is sort of
absolutely. Very grateful for the work y'all are doing. Haven't announced the next set of events, but doing that shortly. There's going to be some good ones coming up in July, August, and September.
Nice. Well, finally, the last thing I want to ask you is let's look to the future sort of Austin. Sort of what are the things, I mean, you're like I am. You have an unnatural love affair with Austin, right? So true Austinites. Like I said, there's been a lot of negative press. The Wall Street Journal wrote an article about a month ago when this will air that was like, sort of like, oh, the future of Austin is over. Obviously, they didn't interview you, because if you listen to what you just said for the last 36 minutes, you'd be like, oh, the future of Austin is it's just beginning. So,
for sure.
I get a little angry. There was a video that came out a little bit ago that was like, basically talked about all the negative stats about Austin. And the guy was a great video producer and a great clickbait guy. So he got 500,000 views. The problem is when that Wall Street Journal article or his video that says, Austin's over, when that gets spread around, that's what people start believing in other places. I know from the Wall Street Journal article, because I was quoted in it, and I have a Google alert on my own name. It was picked up by hundreds of papers around the world, college papers. And I know from friends in California, it was sent around on Slack channels to everything. So there's people who are questioning what's happening in Austin. So as we look forward, what do we need to be doing to make sure that we're countering the bad press and that we're setting up for the next decade of Austin's success?
It's a great question. Let me maybe try and answer your question this way. So as I've obviously made clear, I'm very, very bullish on Austin, and in particular on Austin's potential to really lead the most important wave of innovation at the intersection of energy and tech. My vision and what I am trying to partner and build with this amazing community is ultimately a center for energy innovation. I'm talking, a big old building in downtown Austin. It says something like Energy Innovation Hub Texas, or whatever we want to call it. In that building, we've got industry players, we've got founders, we've got VCs, we've got legal folks providing legal office hours, right? We're convening events, partnership, leadership, sponsored by massive players. I think your Amazon, your Nvidia, your conventional energy players, Teslas, right? And we're solving for all of these factors simultaneously. In addition to a strategy in combination with the state and with Austin, where we've got Opportunity Austin, the Texas Chamber of Commerce, the Economic Development Council, we have got a coherent strategy to recruit everything from international energy companies to sort of emerging second generation players, because we can say, look, we've got all the ingredients here. We've got the tech engineers, we've got this incredible ecosystem of energy players already here. We've got hungry founders, right? Where there's program where we're working with the city of Austin and the state to have a green jobs program and hitting one of the biggest bottlenecks to this thing, right? Like I fundamentally, sometimes people ask me, like, what are you building? Is it a venture studio? Is it an innovation hub? And I've always struggled to answer that question, because the ultimate mission here really is living up to clean energy's potential to be a fundamental driver of economic growth, of development, and of an innovation hub. So to come back to your question, I mean, like, how do you counter the narrative? I think it is continuing to build here and do what we do best, and to like for instance, for me, when I'm sourcing and I'm doing my pipeline, my development, I have a great concentration and I know great founders here in Austin, but I'm looking for founders and from innovators all around North America, if not globally. And my value proposition to them is, it's obviously like access to capital and that kind of stuff, but like, look, if you work with me and we end up sort of partnering on this, like, you're going to have this like fast track to this Texas and to this Austin and this Texas energy ecosystem that's going to massively improve your chance of success and massively, accelerate your traction. And I think that for me is what it is, right? And then again, if you sort of expand that into the bigger picture, right? I think it's having a city and a state explicit strategy for recruiting players here, not just the founders and the innovators, but the other players in the energy incumbents, the sort of the mid-tier players, right? The workforce development, and I don't like. Maybe there's a publicity and a marketing element to that, and maybe we'll sort of like lose a few SoCal wannabe tech bros if they hear that that maybe Austin's like lost its swag. But I think we counter it by just keep on doing what we're doing and the amazing work that Thom, folks like you are doing to just, I think, realize the potential of the city.
Well, like I've been saying, you don't ever tell a Texan they've lost their swagger, or they'll double down and come back twice as strong. And I think that's what Austin is about ready to show the world that we're doing. And you brought something else up where you said, hey, you want to have this building where you've got the founders and the investors and the lawyers and the scientists and everybody there. Because when you bring those people together, that's where ideas are born. That's where collaboration happens. And that goes back to how I started this thing, saying that's one of the things Austin Technology Council believes is we need to make sure that those collisions are also happening across the verticals. So if you have the energy people colliding with the robotics people, colliding with the med tech and health tech and software, that's where new things bubble up. And so we need to make sure we don't get siloed.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, I've done several panels on this topic, and I've actually I'm really disappointed by the segregation, for instance, of like the clean energy innovation ecosystem and the defense tech innovation ecosystem. I think there's a lot actually on aerospace, right? So I think about like what are all the when I think about all these resources and all these assets that can be fuel for the for Austin and Austin's energy innovation ecosystem. Like I couldn't agree more. And I would just also add, I do a whole range of these events and panels and to bring folks together and to try and like get this message out there. One of the ones that I think has been the most rewarding for me ends up being the one that's like the least amount of work to put together. And it's something that I call climate co-working, where either for a day or for a week, we'll literally just we'll have a co-working space where folks can bring their laptop, get to a hot desk. We'll do some like little bit of like, intros, and we'll have some kind of programming. For the most part, it's really just like being in the same place and seeing the types of like cross-pollination that happens when you do that. I've seen folks get funded. I've seen business partnerships get done, right? It really gives me so much conviction for how much potential there is here if we can really get this coalition together to build this vision. Yep.
And the one thing everybody who knows me knows is my biggest thing is we've got to bust the silos, or we just become New York or the Valley, where those silos are pretty well known.
Totally agree. 100%.
So Sean, any last words?
No, Tom, I really appreciate this conversation. This is perfect timing. I haven't actually literally this week is when I'm coming out of stealth and announcing the broader vision for Austin, for Energy Innovation Hub. It used to be Austin Climate Hub. Most folks only sort of knew the events. Those last 2 years were really laying the groundwork for this. So I couldn't imagine a better forum as the Austin Technology Council to share this vision. And I just really appreciate everything you're doing and the chance to talk about it today.
Nice. Well, this was a lot of fun. And thank you to everybody who tuned in. I say it all the time. If it wasn't for the audience, we wouldn't do the show. We're trying to grow it. So make sure you're telling all your friends to check out Austin Tech Connect. And we'll be back next week with another interview with people who are shaking things up right here in Austin. Thank you very much and have a great day.